Now we're going to turn the program over to Kathleen Stocking, who's going to talk about her book tonight. And let's give her a nice warm welcome for coming.
Thank you all for being here. I see some familiar faces and some new people as well. About 40 years ago, I was writing for Detroit Monthly. I was writing a monthly column about this peninsula, and it eventually became a book. And after it became a book, everybody said, "Oh, we want you to write another book exactly like this." And I couldn't think of another thing to say. So I went and I traveled and I aged and I came back, and the peninsula had changed. So tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I've seen in this community. And about 3 years ago, I moved from my house in Lake Leelanau to a senior living place in Traverse City. And it's a place where people are old, so naturally they die. So I thought, well, I should plan my death, which I did. I prepaid for my cremation at Reynolds Johncoff, and then I thought, well, I should also plan my funeral and write my obituary. And in planning my funeral, I thought, well, there should be music at my funeral, and I already knew Ruby and I already knew Jonah, and I thought they could play. And then, since I didn't die for a while, I came to my senses. And I thought, why would I want them to play at my funeral when I'm a can of ashes on the counter, when I could have them come and play while I'm still alive? Because I don't think a can of ashes can probably hear. I don't know, since I'm not a can of ashes yet, but how wonderful that they have come. And Jonah was a classmate of my daughter's at Leland, and Ruby, when she was about 13, and she was being tutored at the school in Peshabi-town. I knew her then, and neither of us can remember a single thing that I taught her, so that probably, but we got to know each other. And that's when I saw her first with George Trudeau playing and got to know their family. And Ruby's parents are sitting right there in the middle, Cindy and Ed, fisherman extraordinaire who produce the most wonderful, I guess, fish the most wonderful fish and sell them at the farmer's market. Yes. Yeah. So what I have seen after traveling to places like El Salvador, in El Salvador, I went to a little school for the very rich. And it was surrounded by 30-foot high walls, topped with broken glass and razor wire. And we were all the most naive little teachers from Canada and the United States. And the first week there, we would talk to each other and said, I think I heard gunshots last night. And finally, after about a week, we went to the guard at the gate and said, I think I've been hearing gunshots. He said, no, that's firecrackers. But it wasn't. They took us in armored vans to the bank and to the grocery store, and you'd see dead bodies in the street. But you would also see the most unspeakable poverty. El Salvador is a little tiny country, about, a fifth the size of Michigan. And it was fine until about 150 years ago, when they had basically stripped the soil, and the Spanish installed noble families to sort of administer the country. And when they started running out of resources, they enslaved the peasantry, and anybody who didn't want to work for nothing was shot. They shot like 30,000 peasants at one point. I mean, it was in my classroom, where all the kids looked like Native Americans. They were all dark-skinned. I said, one day I said, how many people in here have any indigenous ancestry? Not a single hand was raised. And a little boy in the front row who was somehow damaged from either from birth or from an accident with firecrackers said, he was a very sweet little boy. His family owned a chain of grocery stores. He said, "We only count our ancestry on the Spanish side." So, I mean, it was minimal. Basically, they had people calling themselves Spanish royalty running a country where nobody could eat. In fact, somebody said all the food is imported from Mexico. Who knew? So from there, it was Thailand and then Romania. In Thailand, they've cut all the trees, so they've created a desert out of their country. And the people know that. It used to be a paradise, but there's nothing to hold the water in the soil. So Romania, where the communists came in and until 1989 ran the country, and then left and took all the farm equipment with them, you would see whole families, grandma and grandpa and the 3-year-old and, you know, the aunts and uncles out in the fields working the land with the most primitive tools because they had nothing else. But they're better off now, but it's still very, very difficult. And in between times, coming back to the Leelanau Peninsula, one of the things I saw is that where people have enough to eat and where they've grown up together and they trust each other, they are producing things like music and books and art. They are comfortable enough and secure enough that they are able to create. And the other thing that is here, and I'm not exactly sure why, is some very kind people. Years ago, probably 30 years, when there was a murder in Leland, the housemaid who was mentally impaired was persuaded by the adopted son of these wealthy people to put arsenic, taro ant syrup, into their coffee and orange juice. The man who put her up to this never went to prison, but she did go to a women's prison. Wayne Plamondon, who had NJs at that time, every month would take her husband, who was a very strange guy, he called himself a minister, but who knows, and 4 children down to see their mother. And these were kids, I mean, we're talking, you know, peanut butter sandwiches and Pampers and all the kids in the car. And he did this not because the community expected him to, or because, you know, it was easy. I wouldn't have wanted to do it. He did it because the kids needed to see their mom. And also in this community, there was a man who was, I think he'd had a head injury. He was a little cockeyed. He used to collect cans along the road, and he would take them, you know, and return them. And he never bathed. And so if you ever saw him with his cans, you would not go to the grocery store then or not go to the post office then. But one day I had a package. I had to go into the post office. And there was an old woman there, probably like me. And she said to the man, she says, "How are you doing out there? It's kind of cold today. I hope you're okay." And I thought, oh my God, I couldn't have done that. It was like just an amazing amount of human compassion. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was a fundraiser for FIG, who had a little restaurant. Maybe you went to the Little Travers Inn. You know, I brought some books, John Heiss brought some maple syrup, somebody knit a pair of socks, people put money in the jar, people raffled off, like, I'll cook for you for a week, sort of thing. You would sign up for the what you wanted. And they raised $25,000. He had health insurance, but because he couldn't work, the family, 4 little kids, the youngest was 3 months. So in this community where you see that, and you see people who are going out, like the Johns who are fishing, who are, it's not easy work, or the people who have the organic farms, the subscription agriculture places, that's not easy work, and they are not getting rich doing it. Or like me, with a book. And luckily for me, I was able to get into public housing, or I wouldn't have been able to write, because in my old house where I heated with wood and where I had to use a snow rake to get the snow off the roof, it was just all I could do, but suddenly it's 480 square feet. It's like a tree house. It's 8 floors above the Boardman. Well, I have nothing to do but write. So I did. But when I finished it, you can write on nothing. You don't need much to write. But when I finished it and I thought I would get it printed, I had one car repair after another. So that wiped me out. So I went to the booksellers and said, "You've heard of subscription agriculture. What about subscription books? And you share the risk and you share the reward, and you prepay for the books." Well, it's one thing to do that with turnips, because you pretty much know you're going to get a turnip. But they didn't know if this book would be any good or not. But they did it like the old woman who asked the guy with the returnables if he was okay out there, because they're supporting the culture of the community. And I think, who was it? Scott Momaday, a writer, said, what makes us different from the animals is language. But it's also art and music, and it's also wearing funny hats. Do you know of a single animal that wears a funny hat? Right? No, you don't. So we are a unique species. And what I'm seeing on the Leelanau Peninsula, it's kind of a petri dish for human development. I am seeing wonderful things here. And when you think about how, when my parents were born in 1908, there were 2 billion people on the planet. By the end of this century, there's going to be 10 billion. We are running out of clean water. We're running out of clean air. We've cut all the trees. We've killed all the animals. It's like half the species will be extinct by the end of this century. But on the Leelanau Peninsula, I see the Northport Energy Group wanting to be fossil fuel free by 2030. I see people doing the organic farming and putting in all that work, people composting. And that's what I've seen that is different here. Plus the civic spirit. This county had higher voter turnout than any place in Michigan, 71%. It's partly that we have an aging population, so we're calmer and wiser. We have retirees here, so there's maybe a little more money. We aren't so desperately poor, and the people who have money here do it to support things like my writing. And sometimes it's done with grants, and sometimes it's just done by prepaying for books and for helping the young people. And Ruby and Jonah, whom I interviewed, they're in this book. If you don't buy the book for any other reason, you should buy it for that. They are what we have produced too. I mean, when I was younger and lived in New York City, I had like a 6-year-old and a 6-month-old. And my son was very gregarious. We'd lived there a week. He'd already made friends with all the kids in the building. And he came in with 2 or 3 of them, and he's introducing his family. And he introduced his sister. And he said, "That's my sister, Lila. I taught her how to talk." And he said, "Say something, Lila." And she said, "Goo goo gaga." And he turned to his friends and said, "I taught her how to say that." So I feel, and I'm sure you all do, that we are taking credit for what Jonah and Ruby have become, even though we don't know a note of music, even though we did not feed them 3 meals a day and make sure they had a roof over their head, but they're ours. And we think that we made them. We taught them how to talk, we think. It's the way we feel about them. And also, this younger generation, quite frankly, is going to have a very hard row to hoe. Even though we may have had it hard, these kids who are facing just a tsunami of change. And I think the internet, which has been very good in many ways, it's certainly increased and expanded our knowledge exponentially. It's pushing us toward a global culture. It's making us aware of the loss of our resources so that these kids are facing that. And I think we are all trying to make a better world here on the Leelanau Peninsula. And the next generation is going to have that full force. They're good people. They're going to do a good job. So Ruby John plays all over, including in Canada. And Jonah is in 3 bands, 4 bands?
3 or 4 or something
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
And they make their living as best they can by doing their music, which is an amazing thing. So, Ruby, come. Okay. And let me sit. And okay. What would you like to play?
Well, I've thought about this a lot. When Kathleen had written me an email and asked me to come, I was like, yes, I would love to come. At the time, I didn't realize it was about the book or that I was in the book. So when she come on Saturday to the farmer's market, I seen the book and we're looking at it and seen a part in there where it said my name. I read it and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. It really touched me because it says a lot about my life and about my journey that I've gone through the years of my playing. It mentions a lot of the people that I grew up playing with and the life, kind of the music lives that I've taken throughout my journey of playing music. So it was really beautifully written. So I've thought about it, and when I asked you in the email, how many tunes do I need to have prepared, or what do I need to be prepared for? She said 1 tune. And she had mentioned this tune a couple times because when she interviewed me for the newspaper article, I played this tune. If I can play 2 tunes, then I can make my mom happy too.
Oh, good. I said 1 because I didn't want to overwhelm you.
Oh no, choosing 1 tune, I think Jonah can agree with me. Choosing 1 tune over multiple tunes is actually harder, but it made it easy for me because they're both. I'm gonna do these 2 tunes that I'm gonna do. Are both in a cross tuning, which means I'm just gonna retune my fiddle into this is a A tuning. So from the lowest string to the highest string on a violin is typically G, D, A, E, and I'm retuning to an A, E, A, E, which is an open tuning. It's used a lot in like Appalachian style of fiddle playing, which the first one, Red Prairie Dawn, is kind of like a more mountain sounding or mountain fiddle tune. I'm not really sure where I can't remember who wrote this tune. I'm so bad about that, but it was a great tune. I heard it off a Molly Tuttle CD and knew I had to learn it. The second tune is in the part in the book that I'm in. It mentions both of these styles that I'm playing. The second tune is going to be one called the Medicine Fiddle, and it's a Métis tune, and I play a style of fiddle playing called Métis. And Métis is a mix between Native American and typically French, because when the fur traders come over, then they come into Canada, they had mixed babies, and so Métis is a word in French meaning mix. And in Canada, it's way more recognized in Canada, and they have a style of fiddle playing up there. Métis here in the States isn't really known as a people. Lots of times either you're enough Native or First Nations to be part of a tribe, or you're not, and so you no longer, well, you probably recognize that, but you don't have a distinct kind of people to connect with. In Canada, they recognize that as a nation, and so now they have their own nations, and it's really prominent out in Manitoba area, Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And I come into learning this because when I was growing up learning the fiddle, where I'm from here at the Grand Traverse Band, fiddling wasn't part of our culture. A lot of our elders remembered it, but it wasn't part of our culture. And so I was teased a lot in my own community for playing the fiddle. And I hate using this, and I hate using this as an example, but a lot of times I was called white. And that was a way to hurt me. And I was lucky to have parents that I do who opened up my world. And my mom would always tell me, you know, don't let it get to you. And I did my best to not let it get to me, but she showed me a documentary called The Medicine Fiddle. And that documentary showed Métis fiddle players, and the Métis fiddle players, they looked like me. And that to me made a connection and made for me to say, this is okay for me to do. I don't care what anybody else says. I'm going to keep doing it. Fast forward from about 12, 13 years old to a couple of years ahead. And when I was about 14, maybe, looking at my mom for a green, okay, 14. I went to a camp who I was lucky to have TC Celtic, and I see Steve is here, who he was a big part. I'm thankful that him and Mary are here. Steve was a big part of TC Celtic and getting them pretty much raising money for me to be able to go to this camp in Canada, and called Ogomachad. And while I was there was a fiddle instructor who was really involved in Métis fiddle playing, and she kind of connected to me, and she goes, Ruby, I see you're native. I'm doing this big grant that's going to have Métis youth come to Toronto and meet with Métis elders so we can teach them, just pass on their tunes, so this keeps getting carried on. And I ended up being a part of that, and I learned that I can't really call myself Métis because I have a status card or a tribal card. So I consider myself Native American, but I am very proud and very honored to have been able to learn this music. So we'll stop the talking. The first one, that's going to be the second tune. The first tune is called Red Prairie Dawn. right, so the second tune is, this one is called the Medicine Fiddle. I gotta remember how this one starts.
Yeah, your turn. Yes, thank you so much, Ruby. Yeah, aren't you glad you came? Yeah. Well, that's a hard act to follow.
Yeah. Just sit back down, I guess. No, I thought about it, and I have a lot of different groups, 3 choirs, 4 bands maybe. I can't keep track. And I also do a thing they call Bluegrass Sunday. And every time there's 5 Sundays in a month, up at the Congregational Church here in Suttons Bay, we do a thing called Bluegrass Sunday, and it gives us a chance to do a bunch of songs that, you know, may not go over as well in a bar room. But this is actually one that, so I find these songs and chart them out and get a couple musicians to come along and play along for these Sundays. And this one's in D if you want to play along. It's mostly D and G.
I'll try mine.
I think there's an A in there once or twice.
Do this together.
Well, why not? Live dangerously. And this is sort of a, it was written by the Reverend E. Lowry. And then the third verse was written during the McCarthy era in the 50s. And so it goes something like this. My life flows on an endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails the new creation. Above the tumult and the strife, I hear its music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest loudly roars? I hear the truth that liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? Tyrants tremble, sick with fear, and hear their death knells ringing. When friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? In prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? I lift my eyes, the cloud grows thin. I see the blue above it, and day by day this pathway clears. Since first I learned to love it, the peace of God restores my soul. A fountain ever springing. All things are mine since I am loved. How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? This one's in G. So the second song is one of about 3 songs I've actually managed to write. That's slightly less than one every 13 years of my life. But I was living up closer to Northport, and I don't know if you'd realize it, but there are open plains in Leelanau County. And the snow blows through freely all winter long. And it was one of those springs when all of a sudden, one day, we got a little rain, and the next day everything turned green. And those buds had been waiting to burst for so long. And the daffodils came out, and it was a perfect afternoon. I wrote this song in about 3 hours. The rest of them are still mostly unwritten, but this one's just got a little...
Okay. A minor?
Yeah. And the second part.
Okay.
Buds bursting in the springtime, maple oak and the daffodil, birds are turning from the winter, making nests where they will. It's been a long, lonely winter out on the frozen plains. Flowers that I sent you show the spring is here again. Now that the snow's behind us, grab the shovel and the rake. Need a garden to sustain us. Plant the seedlings, hope they take. Let's hope we don't get frosted, that the insects stay away. sunshine in the evening sure gives us faith. Buds bursting in the springtime, grain returning to the land. Can we do a couple fiddle tunes?
I mean,
Or one?
I guess.
What you got in mind?
I don't have a clue.
Oh! Well, why don't we gang up on a fiddle tune?
Sure.
Check my clearance over here.
Yeah. What do you want to do out of that?
Oh,
one?
how about I might be able to remember a verse or two to The Girl I Left Behind Me.
Yeah, we could do that. Let's. Can you play the first couple of? How's that start?
Well, it starts one of two ways, and I'm
Well-
curious to know which one you know, because it either starts.
I know that one. Let's do that one.
Yeah, well, and
think
they
I
work
know.
together, but because the other one's.
What are those? Okay.
The second is
That's-
more the Bob Wills type.
Well, let's do the first one.
All right.
I like the second one.
I might throw the other one in on you. Don't let it confuse you. I think they go together.
We'll find out.
We will. Is that about live dangerously? It's fun that way.
I haven't played this in a long time.
They stop it before it goes down.
You guys are beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah. 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 Well, the last line of my book is let the universe shoot through you. And I think that we have just let the universe shoot through us. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you very, very much, all of you, for coming. Does anyone have any questions? Not a one. Yes. Anneke. Yes, and Ken? Anneke.
Well, I noticed in your last book that you wrote a lot more about yourself than you did in your first 3 books, and I really liked that. I felt like I got to know you a little bit more.
Well, when you're unable to move, you only have yourself. When I went and wrote about Alligator Hill, where I used to literally run up and down the hills, not always on my horse, I couldn't even walk. I couldn't go up to the top to see the view. And when I went out to North Manitou, because I limp and because I had a heavy bag on casters, you can't bring anything on casters because it'll bring in invasive species. They would have put me back on the ferry if the ferry hadn't already left. And there were 2 rangers. One was older and very fit and calm, and one was younger and less fit and less calm. And he was literally beside himself, not knowing what to do with me. And the older ranger just picked up my bag, which I couldn't lift, but he could. And he said, "We're going to put you in the boathouse." And they did. And I got to watch the stars, but I could not walk. So I think as you get older, there are some hard things about being old. Most of them are physical. But you also have a greater comfort with yourself, maybe. Ken had something.
Well, a comment in a way.
Yeah.
Having read, I think, all of your published books over the years, picked this up thinking, well, this is going to be familiar, and I found myself reading it in one sitting from beginning to end. I rarely do that. I'm an old guy too, you know.
Yeah. In better shape, but with some miles on you.
Took me by surprise several in a section that ends with Keel Lake in this previous one, Living in the Narrows. I did not know that Eratosthenes was black. Until you
Yeah, yeah. The guy who measured the circumference of the
That
Earth
is amazing
2,000
feat.
years ago.
Of measuring the Earth's circumference up the Nile via planting set 10 leagues apart from the length of the Nile, through the length of the Nile. And I went on about that for a little bit, and I was going to share that with you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that kind of surprise that just kept me going.
Eratosthenes was the librarian at Alexandria before they burned it. He was also, some of you will appreciate this, is also part of his job was royal flatterer. Yes, so whenever the king was a little down and feeling a little peaked, he had to write a poem of praise. Imagine that as your job. So, any other questions? Yes?
Can you read something from your book?
I can. If you're willing to sit, let me see, what would I read? I went out to the end of the peninsula, and I went again and again, partly because I could drive, and go out there. The end of the peninsula is really interesting. It's big rocks all the way out into the lake. That's why they had to have the lighthouse there to keep people from having accidents. But there's also the wind, and then when you're standing out there, I couldn't figure out what it was that made me so, somebody says it's a high energy place. Agitated might be another word, but you know what? There's only a thin layer of soil above those rocks, and I think the surrounding waters of the lake make a kind of singing in the rocks or a tremor, because I would keep going back. I thought, what is it I feel here? I finally did figure it out. It's all the rocks, a little bit of sand, and then the wind. And if you're out there on a windy day and you're all alone, you can hear the wind in the trees making a music. Yeah, try that one on. So I'm also thinking about all the species disappearing and all the fish disappearing and all the trees disappearing. And I have 2 grandchildren with severe asthma. They live in a city. It's because they don't have good enough air. So you think about that and you think, wow, how are we going to deal with this? So I say, I know now why I've made so many trips to the tip of the peninsula. I'm trying to understand what has to happen to the way people think about themselves in relationship to the land so they can stop destroying it. It has taken so many successive trips, not because it's hard to understand what to do, but because it's hard to see how people will be able to go from dumping toxins everywhere and denying it, which is easy, to not doing it and not denying it, which is hard. It will happen collectively with awareness, is what I'm coming to. Just the way agriculture happened 10,000 years ago worldwide, and hieroglyphic picture writing with a sharp stick and wet clay or a sharp arrowhead on birch bark happened 5,000 years ago, sometimes a little here, sometimes a little there, because people individually and in groups realize it's better for them. The awareness will grow. It will reach critical mass, and then everyone will know. Overall, my sense is that there's hope for humanity. One of the most interesting things about us as a species is how we all tend to start doing the same thing about the same time, even when we're on opposite sides of the globe and don't know that others are doing the same thing at the same time. In Mexico, according to a 2016 National Geographic article, corn began to be cultivated about 10,000 years ago. And a continent away, the same was being done with wheat in Syria and rice in China. Weaving occurred all around the world about 12,000 years ago, give or take, and evidence has been found in Peru and Albania. An article in the New York Times on November 7, 2018, reported that cave paintings of figures had just been discovered in Borneo, that big island in the Pacific, and that 40,000 years ago was the same time that people in caves in Spain and France started making figurative paintings. The author of the article, Carl Zimmer, notes, the finding demonstrates that ancient humans made the creative transition at roughly the same time, in places thousands of miles apart. Why? How could this be? It's a mystery, but one with implications, albeit possibly metaphysical ones. On October 22, 2018, Alice Walker, the famous author of The Color Purple, who has written many books with sales of 15 million worldwide, translated into just about every language, was in Traverse City speaking at the City Opera House, a block from my apartment, a short walk down the alley in the rainy night, and Walker said, "Human consciousness and universal consciousness are one. Seems true to me." Standing in the waning light of a winter afternoon with a soft, soughing wind, the bluish snow beneath the lowering sky, the trailing, tattered, still green leaves on the grapevines, valiantly fluttering in the breeze, is wonderfully, exhilaratingly humbling. Be here with me for a minute in the gently falling snow. Think about the snowflakes, big as cookies, melting into the dark waters of Lake Michigan. Catch one on your tongue. think about becoming friends with a bobcat. Think about the ice world of 800 million years ago. Let the universe shoot through you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, Jonah and Ruby. I'm so glad to be in the same world with you guys. You make the place better just by being who you are. Thank you. Yes,
So what's your next book gonna be about?
Islands and Dogs.
Islands and dogs.
Yeah, Islands and Dogs.